Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of On the Nine. I am one of your co-hosts, Brandon Jones, and we'll figure out what happened to Kaii. The internet is not her friend today. It kicked her off. She'll be joining us here any moment, but we are excited to bring you this new podcast with myself and Kaii. This is a podcast that's been, in the making. I would say over a year and a half. Myself and Kaii have collaborated on many different projects, mainly her podcast, The Healing Element. And now here we are getting ready to bring a new, refreshing podcast where we check in with you all about some current events and things that are going on. And on today's podcast, we're going to look at mental health and Black girl magic taking the front stage, the center stage at the Olympics. Now, it started even before the Olympics even came into play, but now with the current Simone Biles, her checking out in the middle of her competition, I think we're going to see more of this as we go. And here is Kaii back here. No worries. Listen, I've already set us up.
Cool.
I already talked about how white supremacy is controlling the internet. So you don't have to worry about nothing. We are good to go.
Can I tell you, I did a whole introduction and I think I was not even on.
You were not. It was just me. Right after the clip, it was just me. So if you want to reintroduce us, feel free. I already started.
No, go ahead. Do your thing. Do your thing.
Well,
put up my screen while you do that.
No worries. What I was saying was this first episode, we're going to focus on mental health and Black girl magic taking center stage at the Olympics. We are seeing a very interesting dynamic take place that I think is going to be very important for us to pay attention to as we move forward over these next 2.5 weeks of the Olympics and beyond, because we can't get away from how mental health affects us day to day. And I think there's a couple of things at play here that we'll dive into today.
Yes. And this is the first time that I can remember in which there was this whole talk about mental health as it relates to athletes. Mm-hmm. This is something that is very new. And it's usually like, you're an athlete, you're supposed to always be on and ready to answer questions, handle media. And that's it. Like, that's your job and you have to show up. And so now we're starting to see more of a conversation about the mental toll that it takes on athletes, not only performing, but also needing to do interviews right after a performance, whether they do well or not. So I'm looking forward to getting into our conversation tonight.
Absolutely. And that concept of perform, show up is showing out in many different elements. There are a lot of people right now who are talking about how Simone is a failure and she quit on her country, how dare she, etc. And I think having a more objective perspective on this is going to be important moving forward.
Yes. And so kicking it off, I'll tell you, the second episode is going to be so seamless. Y'all wait for the second episode. But this is actually a snapshot of Naomi, who I think this was like around early June, end of May, if I'm remembering correctly, in which she was taking a break from social media. And she was saying for her own mental health. And then she started, I think she pulled out from some major games within the tennis world as well, against saying mental health. And so even in looking at this, many of her fans were saying that she has struggled for years with anxiety. just needing to talk and answer all these questions after the game. So even when she decided, you know what, I'm just going to take some time for myself. I need a mental health break. And she was met with harsh criticism. You know, this isn't something that kind of like an A-list athlete does.
Right. No, not at all. And again, we have to understand there are several things at play here. Mental health is at a point, I would say it's at a catalyst point where we're starting to see the awareness of it being more and more publicized. So you're going to see athletes, actors, entertainers, just in general, and regular common day people actually being more vocal about what they're dealing with. This is not something that we've seen in the past. And also, and that's just due to the awareness of mental health. And I'm a part of this field as someone who I'm pretty much a psychologist, psychotherapist, as someone who's been in this field for since 2013. There's been a huge push of awareness, and there's been a huge push of just being able to talk about your mental and emotional state publicly. And we're seeing this, but you also have to understand that Simone's generation is going to be probably the first generation that their mental illnesses or their mental health or their emotional health is on the forefront. So don't be surprised. This is going to be a recurring thing. And we can't judge these young people based on our ideas of us being a little older than them. Because this is where we're at. This is the society that we're in. I've heard things that this society is weak. Simone's a quitter. She quit on her country. How dare she, etc. But it's important to understand that multiple things can be true at once. Did she quit on her country? Yes. Does she have some mental health struggles and some emotional health issues right now? Absolutely. But one of the things I find fascinating about this is all the mental health concerns are involving Black women and not anybody else. And I really want to figure out, like, what is going on with the sisters right now, where we got Sha'Carri, who, her mother passed, and she had to indulge in a little bit of the marijuana, the weed, to cope with her mother passing. I understand that dealing with your mother passing is very difficult, but that's why she got ejected from the games. We have Okashaka, who, we can say she's a Black woman, whether you want to say she's biracial, multiracial, whatnot. Even though she represents Japan, she spends a lot of time here in the United States. And she had to check out a couple months ago from doing interviews with the media, and she got a lot of criticism around that. But she's dealing with a lot of mental health struggles as well around anxiety and dealing with the media, which I completely understand. I'll be honest, I have a bias as someone who does therapeutic work and who's in this mental health space. I have extreme bias around that. But then we have Serena Williams, who's talked about her mental issues. We have several different athletes who talked about their mental health issues. One being a white athlete, Kevin Love. He talked about his levels of depression before COVID-19 kicked off. So we're seeing this generation of athletes and entertainers come out and share about their mental health and their emotional health issues and concerns. So this is where we're at. And if we're going to demonize these folks, we have to be very careful, because if you're going to first of all, we have an issue and a concern around putting our athletes on pedestals to be our leaders. And that's a big concern, because they are showing us right now that they are just as human as anybody else. And if we start idolizing these folks and they come down to the human level because they're dealing with anxiety or depressive symptoms or whatever, we're going to start to see more and more issues, and we're going to start feeling differently about ourselves. And this is why it's important for us to do our own mental health and emotional health work. But I'm not going to let the sisters off easy with that. What is going on with our Black women? We're supposed to be strong, uplift their voices, etc. And what's going on? When it's time to show up, what's going on? Simone, Okashaka, Serena, what's going on with Black women? I'm looking to you.
Oh, the weight of this response.
What is happening?
You know what? There is the perception of Black women that we have to have it all together at all times. and we can carry the weight. The whole thing of the strong Black woman, we are super women, and we can take on, like, we don't need help from anybody. To the point, and hopefully, I'm going to say this with love, even even the whole thing of like, you can go on vacation by yourself. You don't need anybody. Like this whole
Oh
thing of
yeah.
just not needing anyone.
Hell yeah.
And we as a people are a very communal people. We are, do we like to have our time where we are alone or by ourselves? Yes. But for the most part, we also like to be engaged with other folks. And for some reason, we've come to this place, and there's this narrative that we don't need anybody. You don't even need your friends. Like, go on vacation by yourself, travel the world by yourself. And it's like, and then the whole kind of putting that in context is like, if nobody wants to travel with you, go alone. But that kind of narrative has morphed into every area of our lives. Of the, I don't need anybody, I can handle it on my own. And I think what we're seeing is that's not the case. No man is an island unto themselves. Like, we all need each other in this thing called life. And no one should want to do life alone. I don't want to do life alone. I don't want to carry the weight of the world by myself. I don't want to do that. And nor do we have to. And hopefully through this, we can start having the conversation. But I'll be honest with you, it's interesting because in one breath we'll say, we being as Black women, this is generally speaking, will say that, we're not these strong women and we need our, to show our softer side. So in one breath we're doing that, but in the same breath we're saying we don't need anybody. And it's two extremes. And so there's a happy place in the middle that we can find in which we can say, yes, I do like to do things on my own. But I still need the love and support of the collective, of my family, of community. And that's okay. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you human.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I think you're hitting on such an important point. I think Black women over the last 35, 40 years have been cultivated to be these superhuman beings, right? This independent woman who's taking on the backbone of the community. And I think what we're seeing is the breakdown of that.
Yes.
And I think that Black women are being humbled by the stressors of the world. And I'm not saying this is as, Black women can't deal with it, but what I'm saying is we have to take a very critical look at what these athletes and entertainers are going through and say, is this the right space and direction that we want to take as black people in supporting Black women? Because we've gotten tons of messages over the last year since George Floyd's death, uplift Black voices, which has really been a lot of Black women voices. Support Black women, trust Black women, protect Black women. And now we're seeing Black women kind of like on this national stage folding. Like, they're like, this is too much.
Right.
And I think this is an opportunity and time to say, what does this really mean for Black women? What does this really mean for our community and support around our mental and emotional health? And now tell me this, have you ever heard check in on your strong friends?
Yes.
Now, let's break this down. What does that mean? Right? And I've heard it. I've never heard it from a man. I've only heard it from...
Yes.
I'm not saying that men don't need to be checked in on, because a lot of us do. But what I am saying is that has been a concept that Black women, that's been a meme. Let's get a little deep. That's been a meme, a message that has been carried on, a cultural message that's been carried on from one person to another, that's become a community message of makes the sister that you understand, that you love, that you care about, who's got her stuff together, quote unquote, she might not be all okay because she's dealing with a lot. And that's important for us to understand. So if she look like she got it all under control, it don't mean that she do, because she might need a little bit of assistance. So make sure she gets your support. And I think right now our strong friends, Okashaka, Sha'Carri Richardson, Simone, Serena, all of our strong friends are struggling. And we have to be able to understand that, listen, there is no super people out here. We're all
Right.
human, and we have to be able to support each other at that level. Because when that pressure is on, when you're getting messages from society and community to perform, it can become a struggle, and we don't know what you're necessarily dealing with. And I
Mhm.
think honestly, we're at a place in the space where we're being humbled as a community, and we need to support these women and understand that they're dealing with way more than just performing on a court or a field or a track. They're dealing with being women and people and human beings.
I totally agree with that, Brandon. And from my own life of working in politics and trying to seem like, I mean, maybe other people looked at me and was like and said she looks like she doesn't have it together. But I
Right.
tried to put that image up that I did, and internally I was literally falling apart. And so I think what we have done, unfortunately, in our community, we have relied so much on that image that we put out, but that image is what we're kind of presenting to the world when our inner world is crumbling.
Yeah.
And we're now seeing this kind of like on the national stage of this crumbling world, because we're trying to put up this front that we have it all together. And I hope out of this that we have time to reflect. But unfortunately, what I'm seeing is with love, a lot of posts saying, see, this shows that Black woman that we can't carry the, and it's like, yeah, a lot of us in the community have been saying that you don't have to do this. So I don't know,
Right.
I guess where that disconnect is,
Right.
that we want to provide space for us to kind of to begin to relax, unwind, um, begin to that real, true, deep healing process of, listen, I don't have it together, but you have to come to a space, I'll be honest with you, of vulnerability.
Right.
And I think that is tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's tough to come to that space of vulnerability and to tell someone, I need help. Can you help me get through this? Because we want to show or prove that we can do it in and of ourselves. And that is causing a lot of issues. We're looking at mental health, but we can also find the increase in different chronic conditions in our community. The stress of and the burden of trying to carry it all and manage it all on our own. Our
Right.
bodies are not able to handle that.
Right.
And we're continuing to pass this on to the next generation, to the next generation. And we're starting to see the problem of trying to live in this reality, which we don't want help, we don't need help, but then, yes, I do need help. Then people are confused as to what exactly are we supposed to do. So it leads to a lot of confusion. So I really do hope that through this, we can have a deeper conversation of really that whole strong Black woman, like, what is it, raising that jersey up and retiring that jersey
Right.
and be done with it and say, okay, this is it, because we're in a paradigm that's very different.
Right.
We're dealing with things that are going on health wise. I don't want our video to get dinged, so I'll just say health wise. We all
The
know what
jab.
that is. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
we've been dealing with that since 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And that has had financial impacts on us as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to really take time. If we're saying that we're going to start practicing healthcare, self-care, and prioritizing our mental and emotional well-being, that means that we're going to have to start being vulnerable.
Right.
And ask for assistance and be okay with asking for assistance. And that includes
Mm-hmm.
asking the men in our community for assistance. I don't know if you
Let's
want to
get
go that
into
way,
it.
but
Let's
I
get
mean,
into it.
we have to start doing that. We're the only ones that are like, we don't need you, we don't want you. And then it's like, protect Black women. Like, we can't have it both ways.
We can't. And on the 9, we talk about wellness here on this podcast. How
Mhm.
are you well when you have conflicting messages on what you want and what you need? That's very important. And I think in our wants and our needs, when we discuss vulnerability, we have to understand, what does that mean to us as a people? Because in our community, vulnerability for some folks can mean death, and that's very serious, right?
Mhm.
Vulnerability can mean isolation. Vulnerability can mean that you are disconnected. Vulnerability can mean that you are broke. Like, vulnerability means a lot of things that are not good. But honestly, from my perspective, vulnerability leads to an opportunity for you to grow. And if you have to be willing to go to that space of discomfort and unfamiliarity in order to move forward. And in so many of us, vulnerability has been this thing that we've avoided for so long that we don't even know what that looks like for us to deal with the deeper issues that we have going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now, when we talk about just these black women who are uncenters, they're on the world stage. Let's be honest. They're not center stage. It's the world stage. And they're vulnerable. I can't do this. Simone stopped in the middle. She did them flips off that beam. She didn't land very well. And she said, you know what? Shit, I'm not in the right space to do this. I need to take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
That's vulnerability. That shows a lot of character. I think we need to respect her. But at the same time, we can't have this conflicting message of black girl magic and everything's gonna be okay and we can prosper through anything, because that is not reality. And I think that meme of black girl magic is setting up a lot of black women to be even bigger and better than they are, when in reality they're still human and they may struggle. And I think that's something that we have to understand, that's important for us to be empowered and motivated to move forward, but that does not define who you are as a black woman or who we are as a community to support you, because that can set you up for failure, which I think we're kind of seeing here. Because if you look at some of these quotes, it's just like they've added pressure onto themselves to perform.
Mm-hmm. It's true. And how do I want to say this? Are we going all in first episode?
All in first episode. Why not? Let's do it.
So we as a community, we're only strong as our community.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to realize that we need each other. Black women need black men. Black men need black women. And so we are not meant, and uncertainly, like that's just how society operates. You are kind of categorized in a certain group, and a lot of your success, sure, we can have individuals that are successful, but if you really want to have, there's strength in numbers. So if you really want to have a dynamic life and network, then you really want the people in your community to be uplifted with you. And so we can't have a situation where we allow mainstream to kind of put this kind of idea of what a black woman is, that it's separate and apart from her community. And then when things get tough like this, and it's like, well, now we're going to kind of go right back into the black community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't keep doing this vacillating back and forth. What we have to do is say, listen, honestly, the black community, and Brandon and I have spoken on this several times, as far as the historical trauma and generational trauma, all of that exists. And we have to work together as a group to begin the healing process for that. And that means being vulnerable with each other. That means having serious, tough conversations in which everybody's going to want to leave the room, but we can't. We got to stay there and work it out, because we're in some serious economic times right now.
Right.
And I don't know if we don't realize that, when we're looking at these top tier athletes, yes, that's one aspect of it. But at the end of the day, financially, they're going to be fine. They're going to be able to get the help and the support that they need. But not everybody has the network of a Simone Biles. So what are we going to do in our community to make sure that we are well? And that comes through us realizing that we need each other, that it can't be separate and apart when it's convenient. And then when we're starting to feel pressure, we come back in. And then when things start looking good, we say, all right, I'm out, leave again. No, we have to begin to work together, because the next generation is watching us. The next generation is watching how we move, not always what we say, but how we move. What's our movement? If we, as Black women, generally speaking, if we're saying how we don't need anybody, what is that teaching our daughters that are coming up? And how are we preaching mental health self-care if we're saying we don't need anyone? And what is that telling our little boys?
You don't matter.
Yeah. What messages are we sending? We have to begin to think about our words. Our words are important. Our words are powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, I really hope that this is a time where we say, whoa, we need to sit back and realize what's going on and humble ourselves, and begin to dive a little bit deeper than all the exterior stuff of like, listen, I can buy my this, I can buy my that, I got money in the bank. Past all of that, dig deep to see where we are on a mental and emotional level. Are we growing in that area, or are we just
Mm-hmm.
growing in the bank account?
Absolutely. Yeah. And let's not get it twisted. Finances are important.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're talking about moving a community forward, we have to understand that it gets beyond the material things that you can get with finance. Those status symbols that we've accepted in this capitalistic society are, they are what they are. Yeah, you got that Benz or that BMW, you got that good job, and you got your own house and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, what does it really mean? What does it really mean if your community is, if 80% of your community is not where you are, does it mean anything? Or are you on a mission to kind of move forward where you're at? And again, some people are not going to be that level. They're not going to have that level of kind of community focus. And that may
Mm-hmm.
be okay for them. But at the same time, you have to remember, if you plan on reproducing, if you plan on, caring for your nieces and nephews, if you don't plan on having kids, they have to still operate in that community. And guess what? If they have different opportunities, and everybody doesn't have an opportunity to still kind of develop and prosper at the same level, that's going to be a problem for them or for the other kids. So we have to figure out, how do we get to a place of somewhat balance so that we have all our youth have an opportunity to achieve, and not just you as the individual.
Mm-hmm. And Brandon, when you say that, makes me think that many of us in our community that have held high level positions, maybe whether it be in government or in the private sector, have consistently been in a room where you're the only Black person.
Yeah.
And we know just the energy that takes from you, if you're presenting or just you're in that space because you're doing some networking or some type of educational workshop. That takes a lot out of you, because maybe the type of questions that you're going to be asked, or just the vibe that you can feel when you walk into a room like that. So the importance of what you're saying is, where we are as a community, is that wouldn't we want our next generation to experience less of that?
Right.
Where there's more of them, where they can say, wow, we are actually building. They don't have to experience what it's like to be the only Black person in a high level executive meeting, or
Mm-hmm.
some type of governmental meeting, or some type of nonprofit meeting. And so it has to go beyond just the I, and it has to become a we.
Right. Hmm. And we will struggle to get there if we don't understand that our mental and emotional wellness is very important, because unfortunately, even in 2021, there's a lot of us who are the first of, or
Mhm.
the few of Black people in these positions. And unfortunately, one of the ramifications from George Floyd's murder and death have been these opportunities for more Black people to be in spaces that we have traditionally not been in. And we're going to see more of the first of this and the first of that. But at the same time, that comes with a price to your mental and emotional health, because you may be the first and the only, and now you got to deal with all this craziness around you. And we have to be able to support these folks who are the first of, and they're going to be opening opportunities to not only be the first of, but also support to bring in other people who may have not been able to get access to these things, and now they're bringing other folks, myself included. I've been the first of a lot of things, or the youngest of, or this and that. And now I'm in a position to open up opportunities for other people. And I have to understand that mental and emotional health plays a significant role in that. And I have to be able to show up for those folks and for myself to maintain that position and be a mentor or a jugno, or whatever term we want to use, to support them as they grow and develop.
So true. And it makes me think, these top tier athletes, they don't really. I think Naomi talked a little bit about, she has spoken out about race, I believe, but many of them, they haven't even spoken about what they have dealt with as Black women, being in this sphere where there's few of them, few faces that look like them.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the comments that are made by different reporters or on the news of commenting, sometimes it's like a low-key racist statement where you're like little side eye there of what's being said. But who also knows what's going on in the locker room? Who knows what other type of conversations that they're hearing in addition to what is being broadcast on the news? And so all of that also needs to be considered. Do these top tier athletes who are from our community, do they have safe spaces that they can go and talk to someone about, listen, I just heard this fan call me the N-word, or I just got,
right.
We don't know about all those other experiences that they're going through. And do they have safe spaces to get the help that they need to help them manage that? Or is it just like, well, some people are just mean. And it's like, no, right. Racism is much deeper than someone just being mean to you.
Right. Absolutely. And again, this is where we have to have a clear understanding of what is overt racism and what is, covert or refined racism, right? Overt racism is being called the N-word or being told you're too black to be here or just get out of here because whatever your race or ethnic identity is. That's that more overt version of racism. But the covert version of racism shows up in being, blocked from opportunities because your name is spelled a particular way or pronounced a particular way. So if I look at your job application or your application to an apartment or home, or a job, I'm going to discard it because I can't pronounce your name. Those are the things that show up more commonly in today's society, and we don't always realize that. And some of us choose not to even acknowledge it because we feel like, oh, if I bring this up, that's going to make me vulnerable, and then I'm going to have to deal with the problem and be accountable to what's going on or raise an issue. And that can become very, very stressing for a lot of us, so we choose to just ignore it or brush it off. And in this society, we have to understand that refined racism still chips away at who we are, how we are, and what we have to deal with. It starts to become what I call toxic stress on your day-to-day, where you have to overcompensate and think about the things that you're dealing with all the time. How you wear your hair, the tone of your voice, how you sit or show up in a situation or a meeting, how you show up virtually on your work when you're working and you guys got virtual meetings, what's in your background and how loud your kids may be. These are all the stresses that we go through because we have an additional layer of race on how people are judging us and how we show up. These are important things for us to understand because those things ultimately affect your day-to-day. I want to talk about the previous Olympics that we had just to highlight what I'm talking about. Remember Gabby Douglas, the other Olympian, all right? The other gymnastics, wonder that we had. And what was one of the things that we criticized Gabby Douglas for when she won her gold medals? How she wore her hair.
Her hair. Mm-hmm.
Now think about that. This young woman at the time won gold medals, but all we could think about is her bad weave. Now, come on now. We have to be better than that in this point in time in society, because at the end of the day, there's so much bigger things that are going to come onto our plates, so many other stressors than worrying about our hair. And Gabby Douglas, I don't know if people have seen her. Go to her Instagram. She ain't look like she's doing too hot these days, just to be completely honest. So our mental and emotional health is important. What we do to ourselves is important, how we treat one another. But also we have to understand that in this society, it's not set up to treat us well. Sometimes we'll find our little pockets where we are treated well. But we have to support and protect ourselves to the best of our abilities.
So true. And that comes through beginning to value yourself. Because when you value yourself, then you know how you need to value others. But if we've accepted the treatment of the system and how they perceive people in the Black community to look, act, behave, and if we ingest that and then we internalize that, then we're going to have a relationship with ourselves that way, and then that's going to spill out into our relationship with others. So so instead of celebrating Gabby and this awesome accomplishment and all the sacrifice that she made to make it to an Olympic team. I mean, you talk about when Black people have to be the best of the best. Can you imagine what it takes for a Black a black girl to stand on that stage and get a medal.
Right. Any medal.
Any medal, right? So, I mean, that's something to celebrate. But if we don't value ourselves, if we don't love who we are, then we're just going to try to find fault in that other person. So, there was that whole thing that was going out about her hair, who's doing her hair. It should be, why would they let her go out that way instead of celebrating this accomplishment that she made?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I misspoke because I don't think she had a weave. I think they wanted her to get a weave.
Yeah,
I think she
it was
just wore her
something like
natural hair.
Yeah, it was
Her edges. Apparently, her
edges.
edges
I
was
think it was
bad.
the edges.
Like even worse, right? It was like she didn't have a bad weave. She didn't have a weave at all, so she needed a wig. Like this is where we are. Again, we have to be very strategic in how we are supporting these women. And when we talk about Black girl magic and mental health taking center stage, really for this podcast and for folks to think about is what is this idea, this meme, this archetype of Black girl magic? What does that really mean? Does that mean that Black women are not human? Does that mean that Black women are supposed to be bigger than who they truly are? What does that mean for Black women? Because right now what we're seeing is that putting that extra cape on and tying it on tight is not working. And we're having a lot of Black women kind of fold and show their vulnerabilities, and they should not be attacked upon that. And in order for us to heal and understand our level of well-being and wellness, we have to be able to move forward. Because guess what? Right now it's Black women. But let a Black man say, you know what? I can't finish this football game, or I can't go out. I got drafted tonight, and I ain't going to be able to play for this team that drafted me. And it's going to be even worse of a come down. And we're talking about a generation of young people who have been influenced by their level of their ability to talk about their level of mental and emotional health. And we're going to see more and more young people come out and say, you know what, I'm not feeling it. Does that mean that they're weak? Does that mean that they're not, tough enough to push through? Does that mean that they're not capable to do their jobs? No. But what that does mean is that we've created an avenue for these young people to share this. And we need to create supports and levels of treatment for them to prosper through it, because it isn't a good look for someone to quit in the middle of their, their field or in the middle of their event or activity. But at the same time, if we don't have any support for those people, they might just quit at life. And I don't think you want to see some of your notable athletes and entertainers committing suicide like we have in the past.
For sure. That's such a good point. With that added pressure, we have seen, not necessarily with our athletes, but in our community, we have seen an increase in suicides. And so what is that saying to us? Mm-hmm. And we have some people that in our community that are here physically, but they're just kind of existing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think most of us have been this existing, right? Mm-hmm. In our community, what have we called our culture for the last 40 years? The struggle, right? We went from I'm Black and I'm proud to the struggle, and we haven't left the struggle. So that just existing has become a norm. And when you've been extremely traumatized, when you've dealt with trauma day in, day out, all you know is just day-to-day survival. You're in what we call survival stress management. All you think of is right here and right now and existing and just trying to get from one moment to the next. That's not a good way to live your life. I do a lot of work with young people. And one of the things that we always talk about in programs, whether it's mentoring, case management, social work, whatever, we always ask young people, what are their goals? Where do you want to be in 2 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? And a lot of those young people say, I don't know. And guess what? They really don't know, because they've dealt with so much toxic stress and so much trauma that they are literally going moment by moment. And what ends up happening in those situations is it's hard for them to visualize, to have a mission or a goal or a vision beyond the moment. And it's our job to make sure that we're role modeling behaviors and producing opportunities, and also cultivating these young people to see beyond that. And what we've seen we're not even halfway done with the Olympics, but just the first couple of days of the Olympics is we've seen our young, our talented, our gifted not be able to deal with the moment because it's too much stress and too much trauma, and they have to check out. The checking out in our community has been happening for way too long, and we have to do something about it.
Agreed. And so for those that are listening, please give this video a thumbs up. Please also share. And this video will be posted on the Nine's YouTube channel. So make sure you also subscribe to that as well. But it's really important that we use this time right now to reflect. And I know, Brandon, early on, when I think this had to be last year when we were talking about everything that was going on globally. And right here in the US, we said, this is a great time for people to start to pause and reflect. And I don't know if that was really happening in our community so much, but I say that, again, this is another opportunity for us, especially as Black women, for us to pause and reflect and think about what are we seeing happening with young folks, not only the ones that are competing in the Olympics, but also in our community, in our family. Where are they mentally, emotionally? How am I showing up in the family?
Mm-hmm.
And I think maybe we should, and I even in saying this, speaking to myself, shift from focusing on how others kind of perceive my success, and instead focus on how am I showing up in my community to be an example.
Mm-hmm.
Right? To
Absolutely.
be that person that, no, do I have it all together? Absolutely not. But I'm striving to make sure that I am constructive in my behavior. Right?
Absolutely.
Doesn't mean you don't have fun, but it means that I'm constructive in my behavior. I want to make sure that I'm producing positive outcomes for me, my family, and my community. And just begin to shift away from the focus being so much on trying to live a life as entertainers. Because I'll be honest, this whole entertainment scene of rappers and singers, what we're seeing is a construct of a person.
Right.
We're seeing a handler or the publicist or whatever saying, listen, this is going to be the persona that you're going to have because this is what sells. It doesn't mean that's how that person really is. That's the persona that you're given because that's who they are when they're on stage, or that's who they are in that business world. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that they're that same person when they're home. Even if they come on Instagram and say, I'm home, that's still the persona.
Right.
We have to begin to separate what they're showing us from reality. Mm-hmm. And when we get reality and this idea that they're presenting in front of us, and we start getting that confused, then we get confused, and then we're trying to live up to something that's not even real. Right. Then you're going through even more emotional and stress because you're trying to live up to an image that doesn't even really exist. Right. Hopefully that made sense.
Absolutely. And we have to understand that these images are crafted to entertain. We might, as Black folks, Black Americans, we may be one of the only ethnic groups that look at our entertainers beyond entertainment. Every other ethnic group, the entertainers, they just entertain them, and they're respected and expected. So respected and expected to just entertain. They're not expected to be political figures. They're not expected to be financial investors. They're not expected to be leaders in the community. No, they're just there for entertainment purposes. And if they want to produce a product or endorse a product or show up, that's great. But they are entertainers. For some reason, we have been conditioned to see our entertainers, athletes, singers, and all these other levels of actors, all those things, as our leaders. And I think that that's part of the reason why we're lost. Because if we're going to be completely honest, most entertainers are what age? They're in their 20s. Mm-hmm. Who wants to be led by someone in their 20s? Let's just be honest. If you're over 30, you don't want some 20-year-old telling you what to do. Would you lead yourself at 20 years old? Let's be honest about this. Most of the people that we're calling upon to be leaders in the community are just growing into adulthood themselves. So even that's illogical. But when you don't have a strategy as a community or as a culture to elevate beyond the trauma, then you're asking your young to lead you. And I think that's one of the things that is keeping us back.
Yeah, and you're so right. And as as people that have had more experience, right, our younger population, they should be looking towards us for guidance.
Bingo.
And instead, we're kind of wanting to stay and be more of like a friend than people that they can go to for proper guidance. And that, again, if we're trying to create space for mental health, emotional health, for wellness, that can't happen if, you know, one person, the 45-year-old, is still trying to go out and hang with the 20-year-old. There has to be that level of growth and maturity. And that's what's needed in this space and time that we're in right now. And I think, it makes me think that if we did have kind of like, I don't want to say we don't have elders in our community, because we definitely do. But if we had more, if I could say that, that kind of held that space, is like, come on around, young people, let me show you how this works. Let me show you how the system works. Let me show you how you need to maneuver in certain circles. If we had more of that, it makes me wonder, would some of this mental health issues that we're seeing, would that be differently? For example, if we had, I'm going to get booted for this, but it is what.
Go ahead.
If we had more of Black women in our community that served as elders for young Black girls coming up, like not trying to be their friend, not me, I'm almost 40, not me trying to dress like a 20-year-old and trying to hang out with the 20-year-old, but me as an older woman who is approaching 40, what message, what wisdom can I impart in a young person growing up so she doesn't have to make the same mistakes that I made? That's what we have to start doing. With our age, there has to come maturity and there has to become wisdom that we are then passing down to the next generation. Or else what we're seeing right now happening globally with the mental health crises, that's going to be continuous.
Absolutely.
We have to have the elders in our community. And I'm not saying I'm an elder, but I'm almost 40. So I can talk a little bit to a young person and provide some wisdom to them, right? So that's the role that I have to take. And that comes with me getting old. It's just, that's what it is.
Right.
And you have to begin to grow in that. And I think instead of that, we're seeing where a 40-something, 50-year-old has the same behavior as a 20-something-year-old or a 19, 18. And that's a problem, because then who is that young person looking up to?
Right. And honestly, I would take it a little step further than what you're saying. I don't think we're both about to get canceled. Ready?
Ready, set, go.
I don't think a majority of the women that you're talking about, these elderly or slowly getting to elderly Black women, are seeing these other women as friends. I think they're seeing them as competition. And I think that competition is creating a divide between women who have the wisdom and knowledge of how to support, operate, and maintain a community, and women who are just coming into age. And that is something that needs to be worked on and developed, and is important. And honestly, on the flip side of that, looking at the others, the other side of the spectrum with the men, I think that, again, we see the 40 and 50-year-old men seeing these young dudes as disconnected and competition to them, as far as holding whatever little status or connection to the community they may have. And I think on both ends, for both our elderly men or soon to be elderly men and women in the community, one thing that's important is they have to let go of what used to be and how things were in the quote unquote good old days that probably weren't that great in the first place. And they have to understand that in this new era, you can't do the things that you used to do back in the 70s and 80s. Like, that's done. And when we because a lot of I have conversations with folks who are 50 and 60 plus, and they say things like, we know what these young folks need is a kick in the butt. They just need to get tightened up. And it's like, yeah, that level of violence ain't gonna help, because these young boys are popping you these days. Like, they ain't gonna sit there and just let you hit them with a belt. They're gonna shoot you. Like that. This ain't what it. And some of these females might shoot you too. We ain't there no more. That is gone. That old school hard knock life idea is gone. You have to be with the times. And if you're not with the times, you're missing a huge opportunity to connect from generations. So I think that it's important to understand that just because your era is done doesn't mean that you don't have value to give to the young folks. And young folks have to understand that not all these elders and these, soon to be elder people have, their own, agenda as far as what they want their well-being to have to be like. And there's a generational gap. There's actually three generational gaps. There's one between the boomers and the millennials, or sorry, the Gen X, the boomers, and versus the millennials. Then there's the millennials versus the Gen Zs. But then there's this gap between the Gen Zs and the boomers. So we have these three generational gaps that are there, and none of us are talking. We're all developing in our own little silos, and that's a disconnect in our community. But that is something that is due to trauma. It can be dealt with when we're open to being vulnerable, as we talked about earlier, and we move forward. But the center of that conversation has to be our mental and emotional health, because when we are able to have counsel and support communally, we don't get the Simone Biles or the Okashakas or the Serena Williams or whoever else comes down the line later, because they know that, yeah, baby girl, it's tough what you're going through right now, but you can still represent your community. Go get the medals, and we got your back when you get home.
So true. And Brandon, when you saying that, it makes me think of this. When you are kind of on that path of your own mental and emotional well-being, there's vulnerability and also accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're looking to our elders to provide that type of guidance, that means that, a lot of times older people, they have this romanticized view of how they were when they were growing up. Like, I just studied and I just did no, you were out in the clubs. Like, come on,
let's do your thing.
Exactly. Let's stop with you were a nun. Like, you were out there doing your thing. And so when you're talking to these younger people, you have to you don't have to tell them everything, but you have to be honest about, listen, this is what I was doing. This is what I learned from it. But if you're doing that, that means that you're being vulnerable, and also you're taking accountability for the actions that you engaged in, how that impacted your life and created the life that you currently have. Mm-hmm. And accountability for some of us is really hard. Mm-hmm. To own your ish and not blame other people, but say, nope, this was my doing. That takes a lot of maturity and growth. And the question is, and since we're talking about Black girl magic, that's why we're right now having the conversation about Black women. So my question kind of to other Black women, and including myself, is if we're really serious about doing this work, are we ready to be vulnerable, and are we ready to take accountability for our actions? That's the only way this begins to start to change.
Absolutely. And accountability requires two other A's. It requires action and acceptance. Mm-hmm. And if you're not willing to accept the things that you are not doing well, or the things that have been done to you, it's hard for you to act upon those things and to change them and do something different. And I think that's where a lot of Black people, especially Black women, have a struggle. I mean, we're seeing this with the Godfather himself, Kevin Samuels, who, how can we get through one episode of this podcast without mentioning him?
I know.
I mean, literally, I don't agree with everything Kevin says or does, but what he has done is really put that mirror on Black women, and that has become a sensation where he is literally being targeted to be canceled. But again, somebody has to hold Black women accountable. Ideally, it would be other Black women. But what we're seeing is a huge mass of people who are saying this is not the message that we should have on Black women, especially when Black women are being targeted by society. But Black women at some point have to understand that there's some things that they need to improve on as well, just like Black men. And if we can't have a two-way conversation, how do we get better as a collective?
Right. And again, the youth are watching. Mm-hmm. So do we want to leave our community better, in a better condition than it is right now? Or are we totally about self and it's like, listen, it's all about me. The rest, they got to fend for themselves. Is that the type of mentality that we have? And again, we're only as strong as a group. So if you think it's tough now for us as a community, the more fractured we become, the more harder it's going to be. And right now we do have, some of us, and I'm glad that it's starting to kind of expand, that many of us have access to mental health services, and whether it's through an app or just something in the community. But, again, as things start to change financially in this, it starts to become a little conservative as far as what's going on here in the US financially, who knows if those services will still exist? So we really have to start thinking of the larger picture of the world that we live in, and how will this impact us as a community?
Absolutely.
And that has to cause us to get serious. And as you said, Brandon, okay, reflect, but after you reflect, what are you going to do? There has to be then an action. There has to be a charge next that says, okay, this is a step that I can take in my own personal life where I can be vulnerable, take accountability, and take action, so that way I can produce more positive results, not only in my life and my family, but also my community.
Absolutely. And those action steps, they happen in those 9 areas of wellness: environmental, financial, social, spiritual, mental, physical, emotional, intellectual, and occupational. And
Mm-hmm.
all those O's that we have, we have to be able to be honest about what's going on. And what we're seeing right now is that we have some women on the a world stage, who several of those areas are being jeopardized because the mental health and the stress is too much to bear. And we should not throw those women under a bus. Because of that, well, we should understand what is happening and what we will continue to see if we don't collectively understand how to address it. And it's important for all of us, black men and black women, to role model a behavior of wellness for our children. Because if we don't, Simone Biles is just one person. We might not see black people in the Olympics at all if they can't mentally deal with what's going on in the world.
It's so true. That's real. And that's something we don't want to see, right? We've seen all the sacrifice that all these athletes have made to get to this point. But I think Amos Wilson, and I'm kind of paraphrasing what he says, but, even though we see all this so-called progress, but who's to say that this can't change and we can't find ourselves back in the same position that we were in 20, 40, 50, 60 years ago?
Absolutely. The world keeps moving, but if we don't move with it, we'll stay stuck and we'll be lost in transition.
Yes. So I hope, hopefully with this podcast, people will watch the replay and really begin to think about how they're showing up in their own lives, especially as Black women. I know that we don't really have a conversation that talks about us taking accountability in our own lives. It's more so of, well, so-and-so did this and so-and-so did that, but we have to begin to own our own stuff, especially, if we want that kind of leadership role. That with leadership comes accountability and responsibility. And we have to make sure that we're showing up not only for other people, but for ourselves. If we're not accountable to ourselves, that only damages us anyways in the long run.
Right. Absolutely. So yeah, we have to be accountable, and we have to keep working on it and understand what does that mean to us for our well-being, and to be stable in our well-being and our self-care as we move forward. So keep tuning into this podcast, because we will be addressing this as consistently as we can to help us think constructively about the things that we see going on around us.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Have a good night, and we'll see you August 26th, same time, same place.
Peace.
Bye.